The rain over Chicago that Tuesday afternoon fell with a punishing, relentless fury. It's ingrained in the marble floors of penthouses and the tailored fabric of Italian suits. My name is Caleb Bennett, and at 73 years old, I have spent a lifetime letting the world believe I was nothing more than an invisible old black man, a relic wearing a faded flannel shirt and calloused hands. People see the rusted 1990 Ford pickup I drive, and they instantly write me off. They see my modest wooden cabin on the rougher edge of town and assume I am just another casualty of the American dream. And for 40 years, I let them believe exactly that. Silence, I've learned, is the most profitable asset a man can hold. Noise is expensive. Ego is a liability. Before I tell you exactly how I brought one of the most powerful and arrogant billionaires in this state to his knees, stripping him of his fortune, his legacy, and his pride, please like and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments if you have ever been underestimated by arrogant, entitled people who thought they could step on you simply because of the clothes on your back. I was driving down near Lincoln Park, taking the long way home after a discreet inspection of one of the massive industrial warehouses I secretly owned. To the tenants there, I was just Caleb, the friendly maintenance man who came around to fix the leaky pipes. That camouflage had served me well. I liked it that way, but as my truck rattled past the pristine lawns of the upscale district, my eyes caught a sight that made my blood run cold. It is a sight no father should ever have to witness. Sitting on a wet, unforgiving park bench, exposed to the bitter rain, was my son Damon. Beside him huddled my 5-year-old grandson, Leo, shivering uncontrollably underneath a soaking jacket. Stacked precariously around them were 3 large designer suitcases, rapidly getting ruined by the downpour. Damon is 32 years old, a brilliant architect with a mind capable of designing the future. He had married Sarah Sterling, the daughter of Richard Sterling. Richard wasn't just a wealthy man. He was a real estate tycoon who practically owned the Chicago skyline. He was the kind of man who viewed people as either stepping stones or obstacles. I had warned Damon. I had sat him down years ago and told him that men like Richard Sterling do not see people like us as equals. To a man born into immense wealth, we were labor, we were the help. But Damon had been blinded by love. I pulled the rusted truck up to the curb. The brakes shrieked loudly, making several wealthy pedestrians on the sidewalk turn and glare. I rolled down the passenger window. The bitter wind whipped rain into the cab. Damon looked up slowly. His face was soaked, but I knew instantly which drops were rain and which were tears. A strong man raised by Caleb Bennett does not cry easily. He only breaks when the foundation of his entire world has collapsed beneath his feet. "Dad," Damon whispered, his voice cracking, "what are you doing sitting out here, son?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain as steady as an anchor. "It is 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You should be at the firm designing skyscrapers. Where is Sarah?" Damon looked down at his trembling hands. The defeat radiating from his posture broke my heart. "I got fired, Dad, fired," I repeated, the rhythmic slapping of my windshield wipers matching the spike in my pulse. "Why?" Richard called me into his penthouse office this morning. He locked the door. He told me that the family image was changing. He told me that he could no longer have someone like me attached to the Sterling brand. "Someone like you?" I asked, knowing precisely what the venomous answer would be. He said my bloodline was not worthy. Damon choked out, a sob finally escaping his throat. He told me I was polluting the family tree. He looked me in the eye and said that Leo was a mistake that needed to be corrected before he tainted the Sterling legacy. I looked past Damon to my grandson. Little Leo was 5 years old, innocent, bright, a beautiful mix of my heritage and his mother's. And his own grandfather had called him a mistake. A foul, burning rage flared in my gut, hot and sharp, but I pushed it down. I buried it deep in the dark vault where I keep all my secrets. "And Sarah?" I asked, my tone dangerously quiet. "She is locked in the estate." Damon wept, burying his face in his hands. He took her phone. He told her if she tried to leave with me, he would cut her off. He swore he would make sure she never saw a dime of the family trust. He had his security guards throw my clothes out on the front lawn and told me if I was not off his property in 10 minutes, he would call the police and say I was trespassing. Damon looked at me, his eyes wide with a terrifying realization. "He froze our joint bank accounts, Dad. Everything is gone. I tried to buy Leo a hot chocolate at the cafe across the street so he could get warm, and the card was declined. I have nothing. I have nowhere to go. I am so sorry, Dad. You were right about him from the beginning. Now look at me. I am homeless, sitting on a bench with my son in the freezing rain. I looked at the 3 soaked suitcases. I looked at the little boy shivering in the cold. I looked out at the towering skyscrapers of Chicago rising in the misty distance, many of which were built on land that I secretly owned. Richard Sterling, the name tasted like battery acid in my mouth. 40 years ago, when I was a young man trying to put food on the table, I was the janitor in the very first corporate building Richard Sterling ever constructed. I used to mop the floors late at night while he walked past me in his Italian suits. He would kick over my mop bucket without even breaking his stride to apologize. I was invisible to him then. I was invisible to him now. He believed he was a god in this city. He thought that because I drove a truck that sounded like a dying tractor and lived in a peeling wooden house on the south side, I was utterly powerless. He didn't know that while he was busy inheriting his wealth, I was quietly building mine. He didn't know that while he was buying luxury yachts, I was buying up vast tracts of industrial zones. Most importantly, he didn't know that Phoenix Holdings Group, the mysterious offshore investment firm that held the massive debt on his precious new skyscraper project, was run by the old black janitor he probably didn't even remember. Damon looked at me, expecting anger. He expected the inevitable lecture. He looked like a beaten, abandoned dog waiting for one final kick. Instead, I leaned over the center console and shoved the heavy passenger door open. "Put the bags in the back," I said, my voice as unyielding as bedrock. "Get Leo in the truck. It is freezing out there, Dad." "Dad, I can't go back to your place," Damon stammered. "I can't be a burden on you. I need to find a cheap motel. With what money?" I asked. He fell silent. "Get in the truck, Damon. You are coming home." He hesitated for a second longer, his broken pride warring with his absolute desperation. Then he nodded. He picked up Leo, who immediately reached out his small hands for me. "Grandpa," Leo said, his teeth chattering loudly, "I want to go home. We are going home." "Little man," I said, softening my voice. "Grandpa has got you." Damon loaded the wet suitcases into the rusted bed of the truck, covering them with a heavy canvas tarp. He climbed into the passenger seat, holding Leo tightly on his lap to share his body heat. The truck cab smelled faintly of old coffee and heavy engine oil. I put the truck in gear. The ancient engine roared to life with a loud clanking sound. Damon looked at me, panic setting back in. "Dad, what are we going to do?" "Richard said he is going to file for emergency custody of Leo first thing tomorrow. He has judges on speed dial. He is going to prove I am unfit to be a father because I have no income and no home." I gripped the steering wheel tightly. My knuckles turned white. Richard Sterling didn't just want a simple separation. He wanted a war of annihilation. He wanted to wipe out my bloodline because he believed it was beneath his aristocratic standard. He had just made a fatal, catastrophic miscalculation. He judged a man by the dirt on his shoes and not by the length of his stride. I looked over at my son. "Let him try, but Dad, he is a billionaire." Damon cried out. "He has an army of corporate lawyers. He has politicians in his pocket. What do we have? We have this old truck and your meager pension. We cannot possibly fight him." I merged into the heavy traffic, driving directly past the glittering glass structure of the Sterling headquarters. I looked way up at the penthouse office, where Richard was probably sitting right now, congratulating himself on pruning his family tree. I smiled. It was the smile of a seasoned hunter who has just watched the prey step directly into a steel trap. "Damon," I said, keeping my eyes fixed on the road ahead, "do you honestly think Richard Sterling is the only man in this city with secrets?" Damon stared at me, thoroughly confused. "What do you mean?" I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a clean towel for Leo. "I mean that Richard Sterling just made the absolute biggest mistake of his entire life. He thinks he just kicked a stray dog into the gutter, but he just woke up a lion." I drove us away from the polished city center, heading toward the rugged outskirts where my small, modest home stood. To the rest of the world, I was just Caleb, the retired janitor living on a fixed income. But inside my head, the gears were already turning at light speed. I was mentally reviewing my hidden assets. I was calculating extreme liquidity. I was drafting the exact text message I would send to my elite private attorney the exact moment we got inside. Damon leaned his exhausted head against the cool glass. I just want my wife back, Dad. I just want my dignity back. You will get it all back. Son, I promised him, the iron certainty in my voice leaving no room for doubt. And you are going to get something else, too. You are going to get a front row seat to watch a giant fall. As we finally turned onto the rough gravel road leading up to my house, I saw the look of total defeat plastered on my son's face. He felt worthless. He felt exactly how Richard maliciously wanted him to feel. It was time to change that narrative. It was time to show him that the blood running through his veins did not come from a line of subservient servants. It came from a line of kings who had simply forgotten they wore crowns. I parked the truck. Damon, I said, turning off the sputtering engine. Dry your eyes, no more crying, not for him, not ever again, but, Dad, listen to me. Today you lost a corporate job and you lost a fancy house. But tomorrow, your real education begins. I am going to teach you the fundamental difference between being rich and being powerful. Richard is rich, but he is about to find out, the hard way, that money without character is just paper waiting to burn. We stepped out into the freezing rain, but this time I did not feel the cold. I only felt the searing heat of the battle to come. I grabbed the heavy suitcases from the back. Let's go inside, I commanded. We have work to do. The gravel crunched loudly under the bald tires as we walked up to the small wooden cabin I had called home for the last 30 years. To Damon, this cabin was a symbol of absolute failure. It was a rotting structure with peeling white paint and a porch that sagged on the left side. It was the place where he grew up poor, the place he swore he would never return to once he got his fancy Ivy League degree. I saw the intense shame burning in his cheeks. He didn't know that the peeling paint was a deliberate choice. He didn't know that the sagging porch was perfect camouflage. He didn't know that underneath the creaky floorboards of this humble cabin lay the absolute deeds to half the industrial district of Chicago. We made a desperate run for the porch, shielding little Leo from the biting wind. The door creaked open with a loud groan. Inside, the air was stale and freezing cold. I flipped the switch, and a single naked bulb flickered to life in the narrow hallway. The furniture was a mismatched collection, a plaid sofa, a scarred coffee table, and a small television with an antenna on top. Damon set the heavy designer suitcases down on the cheap linoleum floor. I am so sorry, Dad, Damon whispered, his voice trembling. I never wanted this. I never wanted to bring Leo here. It is freezing. God, what have I done? I walked over to the ancient thermostat and cranked up the heat. The old furnace in the dark basement roared to life, pushing warm air through the dusty vents. It is a roof over your head, son, I said, and it is paid for in full. Nobody can ever kick you out of here. Nobody can ever tell you that you are not worthy of this floor space. Damon sat down on the edge of the sagging sofa, pulling Leo tightly onto his lap. The young boy looked around with wide, curious eyes. Is this where you live, Grandpa? Leo asked innocently. It is very small, but it is cozy, I said, offering him a warm smile. And it is safe. Just then, a harsh, electronic sound sliced through the quiet air. It was Damon's state-of-the-art smartphone, lying on top of one of the wet suitcases. Damon froze. He stared at the glowing screen as if it were an explosive device about to detonate. It is him, Damon breathed out, terrified. It is Richard, answer it, I instructed firmly. Put it on speaker. Damon hesitated, his hand shaking as he reached out for the device. He swiped the screen and tapped the speaker button. The voice that instantly filled my modest living room was smooth, unbearably arrogant, and dripping with toxic entitlement. Damon. Richard's voice boomed with authority. I assume you have found a suitable gutter to crawl into by now. Damon swallowed hard, trying to find his courage. I am at my father's house, Richard. Where is Sarah? Let me talk to my wife. A cruel, mocking laugh echoed from the phone. Your father's house? Oh, you mean that termite-infested shack on the south side? Listen to me very closely, Damon, because I am only going to say this once. You have 24 hours to sign the divorce papers. My elite team of lawyers are emailing you. If you sign them quietly and disappear like a good boy, I will give you a small settlement enough to rent a pathetic studio apartment. But if you fight me, if you try to claim any legal rights to my daughter or my money, I will bury you so deep you won't see daylight. I walked closer to the phone, my heavy boots thudding against the floorboards. And Leo? Damon asked, his voice breaking. What about my son? Leo is a sterling, Richard replied, his tone turning utterly icy. He has sterling blood running through his veins, even if it has been terribly tainted by yours. I will not have my only grandson raised in absolute squalor by a loser and a retired janitor. I am filing for emergency custody tomorrow morning. I will legally prove that you are homeless, unemployed, and unfit. By the time I am done with him, he won't even remember your pathetic name. I felt the immense rage rising in my chest. It was not a hot flash of explosive anger. It was a cold, calculated fury. This man was actively threatening to steal my blood. I reached out and forcefully snatched the phone from Damon's trembling hand. Listen to me carefully, Sterling, I said, my voice dropping low and rough, sounding like gravel churning in a concrete mixer. There was a sudden, confused pause on the other end. Who is this? Richard demanded, sounding utterly disgusted. This is Caleb Bennett, I stated, my tone lethal, and you are making a catastrophic mistake. You are holding my daughter-in-law against her will. That is kidnapping. And you are threatening to steal my grandson. That is an act of war. Richard laughed again, much louder this time. Oh, look at that. The janitor learned how to speak. I remember you, Caleb. You used to empty the trash cans in my very first office building. You always smelled strongly of bleach and desperation. Do not lecture me about war, old man. You are an ant. I am a steel-toed boot. You do not fight the boot. You simply get crushed by it. I tightened my iron grip on the phone. You think you know who I am. I said, but you only ever saw the uniform. You never once looked at the man. I do not look at trash, I step over it. Richard spat viciously. Tell your worthless son to sign the papers. And you stay out of my way. Or I will have the city legally condemn that rotting shack you live in and bulldoze it with you inside. Keep away from my family. You are simply not worthy of the air we breathe. The line abruptly went dead. Silence rushed back into the room, heavy and suffocating. Damon had his face buried in his hands again. He was broken. He believed every single word Richard had said. I placed the phone gently on the coffee table. I walked over to my son and placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. My grip was like iron. Stand up, Damon, I ordered. He looked up at me, thoroughly confused by the unyielding steel in my voice. Dad, just leave it. Stand up, I commanded with absolute authority. He slowly rose to his feet. I looked him dead in the eye. He called me a janitor, I said, and he was factually right. I was a janitor. I cleaned his toilets, I waxed his floors, I emptied his trash, but he forgot one crucial, dangerous thing. Damon stared at me. The janitor has the master keys. The janitor sees everything. The janitor knows exactly where the bodies are buried, because he is the one who has to clean up the mess. I turned sharply away from him and walked down the narrow hallway toward my bedroom. I closed the door firmly behind me. I knelt down beside the bed, my old knees cracked loudly, but I did not feel the pain. I reached far underneath the frame and pulled out an old, dusty shoebox. I sat on the edge of the bed and slowly lifted the lid. Nestled in custom-cut black foam was a state-of-the-art satellite phone. Heavy, military-grade, fully encrypted, the exact kind of phone used exclusively by heads of state and black-market warlords. Beside it lay a small black ledger bound tightly in leather. I pressed the power button. The screen glowed a soft, menacing green, signal acquired. I dialed a private number I had not called in over 5 years. Mr. Bennett, Jensen's crisp, highly professional voice answered. We did not expect to hear from you. Is everything all right? I thought about Richard Sterling laughing sadistically in his penthouse, genuinely thinking he had won the war. No, Jensen, I said, my voice calm and deadly. Everything is not all right. What do you need? Sir? The elite lawyer asked without hesitation. I want you to initiate Protocol Obsidian, I commanded. There was a stark pause on the line. Protocol Obsidian was the nuclear option. Sir, are you sure? Jensen asked cautiously. That will trigger a massive, highly aggressive acquisition strategy. It will expose Phoenix Holdings. I do not care, I stated coldly. Target, Richard Sterling. I want you to buy his debt. I want you to buy his loans. I want to own the mortgage on his mansion. I want to own the lease on his car. I want to own the very air he breathes, understood? Sir, we will begin immediately, and Jensen, I want a private meeting with the head of the City Zoning Commission. Tonight, consider it done. I hung up the heavy phone. Richard had arrogantly given me 24 hours to surrender. I only needed 1 hour to end him. I put the phone back in the box and securely closed the lid. I walked back out into the living room. Damon was nervously pacing back and forth, holding little Leo. "Dad, what are we going to do?" he asked again. I walked calmly to the kitchen and opened the cupboard, taking out a simple can of soup. "First," I said, "we are going to feed Leo. Then you are going to get a good night's sleep. Richard thinks he set a ticking timer on us, but he just set a timer on his own life. By this time tomorrow, Richard Sterling is going to wish he had never learned how to dial a phone." The next morning, the sky over Chicago was a solid sheet of gray steel. Damon walked out to my rusted truck wearing his absolute best suit, an Italian masterpiece worth $2,000, a final lingering remnant of his life as a Sterling. Standing against the bleak backdrop of my peeling porch and the overgrown muddy weeds in the yard, he just looked like a tragic man, wearing an expensive costume to his own funeral. He was going out to find work. He had told me, with forced optimism, that with his extensive portfolio and his flawless experience designing the skyline of this city, he would secure a job by lunch. I slowly poured my black coffee and said nothing. I knew something he did not. I knew that Richard Sterling did not just fire people, he erased them. Damon returned exactly 6 hours later. He did not look like the same ambitious man who had left that morning. His broad shoulders were slumped. His expensive tie was pulled loose. He walked into the dark house and collapsed onto the sagging sofa. "They all said no, Dad," he whispered, his voice hollow. "Every single firm. I went to Miller & Associates. I went to Blue Sky Design. The hiring manager at Miller actually came out to the lobby and told me to leave. He said Richard Sterling had personally called every major and minor firm in the city this morning. He told them that if anyone dared to hire Damon Bennett, Sterling Corp would instantly pull every lucrative contract and sue them into bankruptcy." I took a sip of my bitter coffee, the blacklist. It was a classic ruthless move for a corporate bully with deep pockets. Starve the enemy out, cut off their critical supply lines. "I am toxic, Dad," Damon said, hot tears welling in his red eyes. "I have an Ivy League degree and 10 years of stellar experience, and I cannot even get a job drafting basic blueprints for a suburban parking lot." Just then, a small weak cough came from the back bedroom. It was a wet, hacking sound that made every single hair on my arms stand straight up. Damon jumped up instantly and ran into the room. I followed closely behind him. Leo was lying on the small bed, wrapped tightly in 3 old blankets. His small face was flushed dark red. His skin was burning hot to the touch. "He is burning up," Damon said, absolute panic rapidly rising in his voice. He touched Leo's sweaty forehead. "We need Tylenol. We need strong antibiotics. We need a doctor. Take him to the urgent care clinic on 4th Street, I instructed firmly. Damon frantically pulled out his leather wallet. His hands were shaking so hard, he dropped his only remaining credit card on the floor. He picked it up and stared at it with utter despair. "I can't," he said, his voice breaking. "The banking app." Richard officially froze the joint accounts. He claimed massive fraud. The bank locked everything, pending a lengthy investigation. "I have $0, Dad. I don't even have enough for a cheap bottle of aspirin." He looked at his desperately sick son, and then he looked at me. The profound shame etched onto his face was absolute. Richard Sterling was not just systematically attacking my son's career. He was attacking his very survival. He was willing to let an innocent 5-year-old boy suffer just to prove a malicious point. I walked purposefully into the kitchen. I knelt down beside the old refrigerator and carefully pried loose a specific floorboard. I pulled out a rusty-dented coffee can. Inside was a tight roll of cash singles 5s, a few worn 20s. The bills were wrinkled and smelled faintly of old coffee grounds. It resembled the sad, desperate life savings of a paranoid old man who didn't trust banks. I walked back into the bedroom and shoved the roll of bills directly into Damon's chest. "Take it," I ordered. Damon looked at the money. He saw the 1s and 5s. He genuinely thought this was everything I had left in the world. "Dad, no," he said, desperately trying to push it back into my hands. "I can't take this. This is all you have. Take the damn money, Damon." I snapped, intentionally making my voice harsh to cover the deep emotions swelling inside. "It is not for you. It is for the boy. He swallowed his massive pride. He nodded slowly. I will pay you back, Dad, he choked out, crying. I swear to God I will pay you back every single cent. Go, I commanded. Take the truck, get the medicine, get him some warm soup. Go. Damon scooped Leo up in his strong arms and ran out the front door. I heard the truck engine cough, sputter, and finally roar to life. The heavy silence returned to the cabin, but the air was different now. The air was charged with dangerous electricity. I waited 2 minutes, then I stopped playing the role of the helpless retired janitor. I walked briskly into my bedroom and pulled the heavy satellite phone from the hidden shoebox again. I dialed the secure number. Jensen picked up on the very first ring. Go ahead, sir, Jensen said professionally. What is the exact status of the debt acquisition? I asked, my voice demanding answers. We have successfully secured 30% of the outstanding loans from the mid-level regional banks, Jensen reported efficiently. Sterling Corp is over-leveraged, sir. He borrowed extremely to build the Skyline Tower project. If we successfully buy the massive note from Liberty Bank, we will officially own the absolute mortgage on his headquarters. Buy it, I commanded. Sir, Liberty Bank will want a massive premium. It will cost us at least $20 million above market value to get them to sell the note quietly without alerting Richard. I don't care if it costs $50 million, I said, my voice low and dangerous. I want that specific note, Jensen. I want to own the roof over his head. I want to own the leather chair he sits in. I want to own the ink in his expensive pen, understood? Yes, sir. We will have the legal papers ready by tonight, and Jensen? I want you to find out exactly who insures his massive construction sites. That would be Apex Insurance, sir. Buy them too. There was a profound, stunned silence on the other end of the encrypted line. Buying an entire insurance company outright was a Titan-level financial maneuver. Buy the insurance company, sir? Jensen asked, his voice trembling slightly. You heard me. I want to be the one who decides if his construction sites are safe to operate. I want to be the one who can shut down his multi-million-dollar job sites with a single, devastating inspection. Buy Apex. Use the untraceable offshore account so he never sees it coming. I hung up the heavy phone. Richard Sterling thought he had successfully starved us out. He thought he had cut off our supply lines. He didn't know that while he was busy blocking my son from getting a job paying $60,000 a year, I was busy buying the massive bank that held his critical loans worth $60 million. We were sitting quietly at the kitchen table counting the crumpled fall bills I had pulled from the floorboard when a harsh noise erupted. It was not Damon's smartphone. It was the ancient landline, a dusty, yellowed device hanging on the wall that only annoying telemarketers called. Damon stared at it, utterly confused. Nobody had that number. Answer it, I said. Damon picked up the heavy receiver. Hello? There was a brief silence and then a sound that shattered my heart. A terrified, desperate, broken whimper. Damon, it's me, Sarah. Damon gripped the phone so tight his knuckles instantly turned stark white. Sarah, where are you? Are you okay? I am locked in the maid's quarters, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with sheer hysteria. I stole Maria's phone, Damon. You have to help me. He has me locked in. The windows have heavy iron bars. What do you mean locked in? Damon shouted, immediately standing up and knocking his wooden chair over backwards. My father, Sarah sobbed uncontrollably. He brought a doctor to the house, a private, shady doctor, Damon. I am pregnant. The room went instantly deadly silent. I looked at my son. His eyes went wide. Pregnant? He breathed. I am 8 weeks along, Sarah cried. But Richard found out. He saw the test in the trash. He says he won't let another mistake pollute his pristine house. He scheduled a forced procedure for tomorrow morning, here at the house. He said if I don't do it, he will declare me mentally incompetent and have me legally committed to an asylum. He says I have to choose between the baby and my freedom. A primal, terrifying roar ripped through Damon's throat. It was a sound of pure, blinding rage. He slammed the phone down on the table but kept it on speaker. I am coming for you, he screamed at the phone. I am coming right now. I will kill him with my bare hands. Damon was already moving rapidly toward the door, his fists tightly clenched. He was going to drive to the Sterling estate and beat Richard Sterling to a bloody pulp. And he would end up in maximum security prison for life, exactly where Richard meticulously planned for him to go. Damon, stop, I barked. I moved faster than any 73-year-old man should ever move. I lunged and grabbed his arm. My grip was like a steel vis. I spun him around and shoved him against the wall. You walk out that door with your fists swinging, and you lose everything. I yelled directly into his face. You touch one single hair on his arrogant head, and he wins. He wants you to be the violent thug he tells everyone you are. Do not give him the profound satisfaction. Damon slumped against the wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. He buried his face in his hands, sobbing uncontrollably. Then what do we do, Dad? We use the law. We use his own corrupt game against him. I grabbed the keys from the counter. Get in the truck. The long drive to the Sterling estate was a stark journey between two different worlds. We pulled up to the massive, imposing iron gates of the Sterling estate. A guard booth stood firmly at the entrance. A muscular man in a tactical uniform stepped out, his hand resting menacingly on his holstered weapon. Lost are we? The guard asked arrogantly. Deliveries are in the back. Open the gate, I said, my voice low and steady. We are here for Sarah Bennett. The guard laughed mockingly. Oh, you must be the pathetic ex-husband. Turn around, pal. This is private property. If you are not gone in 10 seconds, I am fully authorized to use extreme force. Suddenly, the massive mahogany front doors of the mansion swung wide open. Richard Sterling confidently stepped out onto the grand balcony, overlooking the driveway. He was wearing a pristine white linen suit, casually holding a crystal glass of expensive scotch. I see the trash has arrived, Richard shouted, his voice echoing loudly in the courtyard. She doesn't want to see you, Damon. She has a big medical procedure tomorrow. We are effectively cleaning up her life, getting rid of the parasites. Guard, remove them immediately. The guard stepped forward, raising the sparking taser. I calmly checked my watch again. 3, 2, 1. The piercing sound of heavy sirens suddenly cut through the air. Not just one siren, 5. 3 heavy police cruisers screeched to a sudden halt directly behind my truck, blocking the driveway. Richard's smug face dropped instantly. He tightly gripped the balcony railing. What is the meaning of this? He shouted. An officer confidently stepped out of the lead car. It was Sergeant Miller. Mr. Sterling, we received a highly credible report of a hostage situation at this exact address. The report explicitly states that an adult female, Sarah Bennett, is being held against her will and threatened with forced medical procedures. We need to do a thorough welfare check immediately. Open the gate. Richard turned bright red with fury. This is utterly ridiculous. I will have your badge for this. Do you know who I am? Open the gate, sir, or we will ram it, Sergeant Miller barked with authority. Richard froze. He looked nervously at the neighbors' massive houses. He saw heavy curtains twitching. Extremely important people were watching. A chaotic police raid on his mansion would be on the front page of the morning news within the hour. Open it, Richard hissed furiously to the guard. The massive iron gate swung open with a heavy groan. Richard disappeared angrily into the house. A few agonizingly long minutes later, the front door slowly opened again. Sarah stumbled out. She looked pale and terrified, tightly clutching a small travel bag. When she saw Damon, she ran. They collided in a desperate, clinging hug. Richard stood ominously in the doorway, his face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. He pointed a shaking finger at Sarah. If you get in that pathetic truck, Sarah, you are dead to me. He screamed. Sarah turned slowly to look at her father. She was trembling, but she stood tall. I am leaving. Dad, fine, Richard yelled. Go then. But know this. I am cutting you off. The trust fund is gone. The inheritance is gone. You will have nothing. You are going to go live in a filthy shack with these animals. You will starve, Sarah. Don't come crawling back when you are hungry. She walked purposefully over to my rusted truck. She climbed carefully into the back seat. I would rather starve with them than eat at your table, she said fiercely. Get in the car, Dame, I said, starting the sputtering engine. Enjoy the squalor, Richard screamed as we backed out. I will see you in court. I will take the boy. I will take everything. I put the truck securely in drive. As we drove away, Sarah leaned her exhausted head on Damon's shoulder. She had just traded a $50 million inheritance for a cramped seat in a 30-year-old Ford. She had just traded immense financial security for love. But as I drove us back toward the dark reality of our situation, I knew the hardest part was just beginning. 7 grueling days had passed since we dramatically escaped the Sterling estate. The blockade was working. Richard Sterling had successfully, utterly terrified every architecture firm in the city into ghosting Damon. The invitation arrived on a gloomy Tuesday morning. It was delivered by a courier in a sleek black sedan who looked at my peeling front porch with visible, utter disgust. Sarah opened it, her hands noticeably trembling. "It is the annual charity gala," she whispered in horror. "The biggest high society event of the entire year. My father is the keynote speaker." And at the bottom, written in pristine handwritten ink, was a personal note: "Let's put the past behind us for the sake of the family." Damon scoffed loudly. "He does not want peace, Sarah," he said firmly. "He wants a spectacular show. He wants us to come crawling back so he can publicly parade us around like conquered trophies." I sat quietly in my armchair. "He is right, Sarah," I said. "Richard Sterling does not apologize. He negotiates. And right now he genuinely thinks he holds all the cards. We are going, but we can't just walk in there." Damon argued. "Look at us, Dad. I literally pawned my favorite watch yesterday just to buy groceries." "You belong wherever you stand," I said fiercely. "But you are not going alone. I am driving you. I will put on my old chauffeur uniform, the one I kept from 40 years ago. I will be your driver. I will be the help. The best place to hide a knife is in the hand of the man nobody ever notices." The night of the massive gala, we pulled up slowly to the grand entrance of the Millennium Hotel in a modest rental car. I got out smoothly and opened the rear door for Sarah. We walked confidently into the massive ballroom. It was a shimmering sea of blinding diamonds and tailored tuxedos. Richard Sterling was boldly holding court, right in the center of the room. When he noticed Damon and Sarah, the entire room went dead quiet. "Ah, the prodigal daughter returns," Richard announced loudly. And she brought her pathetic baggage. A nasty ripple of nervous laughter went through the wealthy crowd. Damon stiffened. "Hello, Richard," Damon said. "You invited us. We are here." Richard walked over slowly. "I did invite you. I wanted to see if you had finally learned your lesson. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet my estranged son-in-law. I hear he is desperately looking for work. Perhaps you need someone to mow your lawns?" The crowd laughed. It was a remarkably cruel, sharp sound. Sarah grabbed Damon's arm. "That is quite enough," Richard, Sarah said, her voice shaking. "We are leaving." "Oh, don't leave just yet." Richard sneered loudly. "You haven't introduced the staff." He looked right past them, and his cold eyes landed squarely on me. "Well, well, well," Richard gloated. "If it isn't Caleb, the janitor, I see you finally found a pathetic job you are qualified for. Driving cars. Does the cheap uniform come with a muzzle? Or are you allowed to legally speak to your betters tonight?" I slowly lifted my head. I looked him dead in the eye. "Good evening, Mr. Sterling," I said calmly. Richard chuckled maliciously. He took a bold step closer to me. "You know, I need a refill," he said, dramatically swirling his dark red wine. "And since you are clearly the help, perhaps you can be immensely useful for once." He raised his crystal glass exactly as if to hand it to me. But then he intentionally tipped his wrist. The dark red wine cascaded out of the glass, splashing all over the crisp front of my black jacket. The entire room gasped in shock. "Oops," Richard said loudly, his face a mocking mask of fake surprise. My hand totally slipped. "My apologies, old man." He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a crisp $10 bill. He crumpled it up and threw it directly at my chest. "Here, that should cover the dry cleaning. Clean yourself up, and then vigorously clean up this mess on the floor." Damon snapped. "You son of a bitch!" He roared. Damon lunged forward, his fist pulled back. "Stop!" My voice cracked through the tense air like a lethal whip. I reached out and grabbed Damon's wrist just inches from Richard's smug face. My grip was unbreakable. "Dad, let me go," he hissed furiously. "Let me kill him, not here." "Damon," I said, my voice low, almost a whisper. "Not like this." I turned back to Richard. He looked profoundly disappointed that the punch hadn't landed. "You are a generous man, Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice totally flat. "But firmly keep your money. You are going to desperately need every single penny of it, very soon." I put a firm hand on Damon's back and guided him away. As we stepped out into the cool night air, I leaned in close to Damon's ear. "You did phenomenally good, son," I whispered. "Good?" Damon choked out in despair. "Dad, he brutally treated you like a dog. He threw money at you, and we did nothing." I opened the car door for him with a cold smirk. We didn't just take it. Damon, I said. We recorded it. I tapped the small, unnoticeable button on the lapel of my soaked jacket. A tiny, hidden camera lens briefly glinted in the bright streetlight. Every single word he said, every drop of spilled wine, every single cruel laugh from his rich, elite friends, it is all on high-definition tape, I stated. And while he was busy performing for his captive audience, my lawyer Jensen just finalized the massive purchase of the bank that holds the loan on this very hotel. Damon looked at me, utterly stunned. You bought the hotel? He asked. Not quite yet, I said. Just the massive debt, but by tomorrow morning, Richard Sterling won't even be able to legally book a room here. He desperately wanted a show. Well, the curtain is just going up, and he has no idea that he is simply the clown. The deep, dark wine stain on my chauffeur uniform refused to wash out. I scrubbed it viciously with bleach until my knuckles were raw, but the dark purple mark stubbornly remained. I hung the stained jacket prominently on the back of the kitchen chair. I wanted to look directly at that stain while I drank my coffee. It was not a stain anymore. It was a massive glowing target. While Richard was likely sleeping off an expensive hangover in his pristine penthouse, I was sitting quietly at my small, wobbly kitchen table with a thick stack of legal documents. My elite lawyer Jensen had done his digging beautifully. He found the massive, fatal crack in the foundation of the Sterling Empire. It was a massive development project called the Skyline. It was Richard's ultimate vanity project. The construction was stalled, and most importantly, Richard owed $50 million to a massive consortium of banks that were rapidly losing patience. He was drowning. He needed a miracle, so I decisively decided to give him one. I instructed Jensen to register a new holding company. We called it Phoenix Holdings. It sounded impressive, but Phoenix Holdings had no employees. It was just a shell, a terrifying ghost, and the only person pulling the massive strings was an old black man sitting in a wooden shack with an encrypted satellite phone. I sent Jensen directly into the lion's den on a Wednesday morning. Jensen confidently walked into the Sterling headquarters wearing a $3,000 suit, carrying a briefcase made of fine Italian leather. He sat down smoothly and laid the offer directly on the table. A $50 million capital injection, immediate liquidity, no questions asked about the massive delays. Richard must have thought he was dreaming. He didn't ask where the money came from. Raw greed has a tragic way of blinding a man to the obvious. He signed the preliminary agreement right there on the spot. He literally invited the Trojan horse into his city, and he eagerly held the gate open for it. Later that afternoon, Damon came home from a local building supply store. He looked pale. He looked exactly like he had seen a ghost. Dad, he said, his voice shaking. I saw him, Richard. I was at the lumberyard on Fifth Avenue. He walked right up to me. Dad, he looked ecstatic. He told me that his days of worrying were over. And then he told me the devastating news. He said a massive international investment firm just backed him. Phoenix Holdings. I kept my face still. Is that so? I said calmly, yes. Damon cried out in despair, he is saved. He told me that with this powerful new partner, he is going to buy up every small architecture firm in the city, just to make sure I never, ever work again. He said he is going to hire the most ruthless lawyers in the country and take Leo away from me. We lost Dad. I looked at my son. I saw the absolute terror that Richard Sterling had successfully planted in his heart. Richard was literally using my money to threaten my son. The irony was so thick I could vividly taste it. He was bragging about the exact janitor he had humiliated. He did not know that the powerful hand reaching out to save him was actually the hand that was positioning itself to strangle him to death. Listen to me, I said, my voice low and fierce. Richard Sterling is an absolute fool. Money is not always a lifeline, son. Sometimes it is a leash, and sometimes it is a heavy anchor. Richard thinks he just got a brilliant partner, but what he really got was a ruthless boss. But he said he is going to crush me, Damon said fearfully. Let him vividly talk, I said. Let him feel totally invincible. A man who genuinely thinks he cannot be touched is a man who stops looking over his shoulder. And that is exactly where we desperately want him. The morning of the massive signing, I did not wear a suit. I wore a faded gray uniform that I bought at a second-hand store for exactly $5. It smelled faintly of old mothballs. I fiercely wanted to look exactly like what Richard Sterling expected me to be. A nobody, a servant, Jensen, was waiting for me in the lobby of Sterling Tower. "Mr. Bennett, are you sure about this?" Jensen asked, nervously wiping cold sweat from his forehead. "He won't throw me out," I said calmly, taking the heavy box of legal files from him. "He needs the money too damn much." We took the private elevator to the penthouse. We walked into the grand boardroom. Richard was standing boldly by the massive window. When he vividly saw Jensen, he put on a massive fake smile. "Jensen, the man of the hour!" Richard boomed loudly. Then Richard looked directly past Jensen. He saw me standing quietly by the door, holding the massive box of files. My head bowed low. His fake smile instantly vanished. "What the hell is he doing here?" Richard spat. "He is my assistant, Mr. Sterling." Jensen didn't flinch. "He carries the documents." Richard laughed, and cold, cruel sound. "Your assistant? You mean the janitor? This man is an absolute curse, Jensen. Why on earth would a massive firm like Phoenix hire a pathetic loser like this?" I stood still. I stared intently at the carpet. "Let's sign the papers," Jensen said forcefully. Richard sat down at the head of the long mahogany table. "This is the standard loan agreement," Jensen explained. "But as we discussed, given the risky nature of the project, the board of Phoenix Holdings requires a personal guarantee." Richard stopped instantly. "A personal guarantee," he read, his voice shaking. "You want me to legally pledge my private assets? My personal portfolio, my cars?" "Everything," Jensen said coldly. "It is a standard formality." Richard hesitated profoundly. If he blindly signed this and the project failed, he would be instantly destitute. "I don't know," Richard muttered frantically. "I understand," Jensen said coolly, starting to pack the papers. "I will inform the board you declined." "Wait." Richard snapped desperately. He picked up the gold pen, but before the pen touched the paper, he stopped. He looked at me again. He felt small, and arrogant men like Richard Sterling cannot handle feeling small. They need to crush someone else to feel big again. "My shoe," Richard said, pointing under the table. "My shoe is horribly scuffed. I cannot sign a $50 million deal with scuffed shoes." He looked viciously at me. "Boy, come here." I walked slowly to the table. "Yes, Mr. Sterling," I said, "my shoe is filthy." Richard said, "Fix it. Use your pathetic sleeve. Use your cheap shirt. Just get down on your knees and vigorously buff it. Vigorously show me that you fully know your place. If this pathetic man doesn't kneel, I don't sign." It was a sick power play, a twisted, disgusting test of dominance. I thought intensely about Damon. I knew he was watching. I had a high-definition button camera actively recording on my shirt. He was sitting horrified in the truck outside, but I also knew that pride is expensive, and revenge is the ultimate investment. I slowly lowered my body. My old knees cracked loudly as they hit the plush carpet. I bowed my head. I reached out with the sleeve of my gray uniform. I gently touched the expensive leather of his shoe. "That is exactly it," Richard purred sadistically. "Rub it, make it shine." I moved my arm slowly back and forth. Inside my head, I was not kneeling. $10 million, I thought as I firmly rubbed the toe. That is the price for this insult. 50 million. That is the ultimate price for the bloodline you foolishly called unworthy. "Good," Richard said, kicking my hand away. "Now get out of my sight." I stood up slowly. I walked silently back to the corner. Richard eagerly picked up the pen. He blindly signed the terrifying personal guarantee. He triumphantly handed the papers to Jensen. "Done. When do the massive funds hit?" "Within the hour," Jensen said smoothly. Richard looked directly at me one last time. "You see, Caleb, that is the fundamental difference between us. I sign checks. You pathetically shine shoes." "I will remember it, Mr. Sterling," I said coldly. Jensen and I quickly walked out to the elevator. As the doors closed, Jensen looked exactly like he was about to be sick. "Mr. Bennett, I am so sorry," he whispered in horror, "but he made you kneel." I smiled. "He genuinely thinks I knelt to serve him, Jensen, but a sniper meticulously kneels before he takes the shot." I was not serving him. I was simply taking deadly aim, file the devastating papers, aggressively register the massive lien on his house today. I climbed into my rusted truck. Damon was crying in the passenger seat. "Dad, why did you willingly let him do that to you?" "Because, son," I said, putting the heavy truck in gear. "I just bought his dignity for the extremely cheap price of a shoe shine. And believe me, it was a magnificent bargain. Over the next few weeks, I worked in the shadows. I called my contact at the powerful zoning commission. I called Apex Insurance, the massive company I now own. I methodically laid out the catastrophic safety violations. The very next morning, Richard Sterling woke up to a complete nightmare. His multi-million-dollar Skyline project was condemned. His insurance was instantly voided, and Liberty Bank officially called in his catastrophic $75 million loan due to the massive material breach. He was fundamentally broke. The address Jensen gave Richard for the emergency meeting was not a luxury penthouse. It was an abandoned textile factory in the heart of the industrial district. I sat in the center of the massive, empty concrete floor on a single heavy wooden chair, obscured by the deep shadows. At exactly 2 o'clock, the heavy metal doors creaked open. Richard Sterling walked in. "Is anyone there?" Richard called out, "I am looking for the brilliant chairman of Phoenix Holdings." I stepped firmly out of the shadows and fully into the bright circle of yellow light. "We have a deal, Richard," I said. Richard's eyes widened, his jaw dropped. He staggered back. "You, the janitor." "Hello, Richard," I said, holding up the glowing voice recorder that captured every vile word he just spewed about Damon and me. "I am the chairman. I am Phoenix Holdings. I am the bank. I am the insurance. And now, I hold the tape that will permanently destroy your reputation." He lunged for the recorder, but I caught his wrist and twisted it, forcing him to his knees on the filthy concrete. "You said you didn't want my blood mixed with yours," I whispered lethally. "I am carrying your pathetic fate now." I threw him to the dirt and walked away. The victory was sweet, but later that evening at the cabin, reality struck. We were quietly sitting at the table when Sarah suddenly dropped her fork. Her face turned the color of pale ash, and she collapsed, hitting the floor with a terrifying thud. Damon screamed in sheer terror. We rushed her to St. Jude's Hospital in my truck, me running every single red light. The doctor emerged an hour later, his face grave. "She is stable, but this is a high-risk pregnancy. Her body is shutting down from extreme stress. Any more shocks, and she will lose the child." Damon wept by her bedside, holding her fragile hand. But the peace was shattered. The hospital door burst open. Richard Sterling barged in. He looked terrible, his suit rumpled, smelling of sweat and sheer desperation. "You are causing a massive scene, Sarah." Richard barked viciously, fainting in a shack. "Do you have any idea how this looks for my brand?" "Get the hell out!" Damon roared, stepping between Richard and the bed. "I made a new deal," Richard shouted, his eyes wild and manic. "I found a massive investor named Mr. Henderson. He will inject $75 million to save my company. But he has one condition. He wants a wife. All you have to do is sign the divorce papers with this loser and proudly marry Henderson." "You are selling me," Sarah whispered in sheer horror. "I love Damon. I am having his child." "Love does not pay the damn mortgage." Richard screamed, his face turning bright purple. He reached into his jacket, pulled out the crumpled divorce papers, and shoved them in her face. "Sign them now." "I won't," Sarah sobbed. Richard snapped. "You ungrateful little bitch." He roared. He raised his hand and viciously slapped her across the face. Time stopped, but Damon moved faster than lightning. He launched himself across the room. His fist connected with the exact center of Richard's face. Crack! Richard's nose shattered. Blood sprayed across the pristine white sheets. Damon was on top of him, relentlessly pounding his ribs, unleashing years of suppressed rage. "Damon, stop!" I yelled, forcefully hauling my son off. Richard lay on the floor, groaning in absolute agony, blood pouring from his face. But then he smiled, a bloody, broken smile. "Help!" He screamed at the top of his lungs. "Murder!" "He attacked me." Security and police burst in. They immediately grabbed Damon, slamming him against the wall and handcuffing him. "I love you," Damon whispered to Sarah as he was dragged away. Richard struggled to his feet, holding a bloody towel to his shattered nose. He leaned in close to Sarah. "I will strongly make sure Damon gets 10 years for aggravated assault. Unless you legally sign the papers." He walked out, leaving a violent trail of blood. Richard thought he had brutally played his final ace. He genuinely thought that by putting Damon in a cage, he could forcefully make us surrender. He was wrong. Richard forcefully put Damon in a cell to keep him away from the fight, I told Sarah softly. But he forgot about the other Bennett. Tomorrow morning, he is going to find out that I own the courthouse. I drove directly to the North District Police Station. Richard Sterling was standing at the front desk, bleeding onto the floor, shouting at the desk sergeant. "Deny his bail," Richard screamed. "He is a violent danger to society." Richard saw me walk in. "The janitor has pathetically arrived. You can't save your son. Bail will be $50,000. What are you going to do, pawn your rusted truck?" The heavy door to the captain's office swung open. Captain Miller, a massive man who ran the precinct with an iron fist, stepped out. "What is all this noise, Captain?" Richard said, trying to look dignified. "I am Richard Sterling. Remove this pathetic vagrant." Captain Miller ignored Richard. He walked straight up to me and respectfully extended his hand. "Mr. Bennett," Miller said warmly. "I didn't know you were coming." "Hello, Marcus," I said. "I see you got that promotion, thanks to you, sir." Richard stood there frozen. "Captain, do you actually know this man?" Captain Miller turned fiercely to Richard. "Mr. Bennett proudly put me through the entire police academy. He paid for my tuition. He intimately owns the very land this precinct sits on. He isn't a janitor. He is the landlord." Richard's jaw dropped. He looked at my cheap flannel shirt in utter disbelief. "Your son's paperwork is waived," Miller said respectfully to me. "He is free to go. You can't legally do that." Richard screamed, "If you shout in my station again, I will have you arrested for disorderly conduct." Miller threatened deeply. Damon walked out, free. We walked past the utterly defeated billionaire. "You still genuinely think this is about money, Richard?" I asked softly. "Invest in people, concrete cracks, but deep loyalty lasts forever." The massive morning of the official shareholder meeting finally arrived. Richard Sterling genuinely woke up, believing he had survived the storm. He eagerly expected Phoenix Holdings to actively save him. I parked my truck, Damon, Sarah, and I walked to the towering Sterling headquarters. But I was no longer wearing a flannel shirt. I was wearing an impeccably tailored, charcoal gray Tom Ford suit that cost $5,000. My expensive shoes were polished to a perfect mirror shine. We walked into the packed boardroom on the 50th floor. 50 of the city's most powerful, wealthy investors were sitting nervously. Richard stood arrogantly at the head of the massive mahogany table, wearing dark sunglasses to hide his bruised eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard boomed proudly, "I have secured a massive partner. Phoenix Holdings is injecting $75 million into Sterling Corp. We are saved." He pointed a finger at Damon and Sarah in the back. "To those who doubted me, watch. This is what winning looks like." Jensen gracefully stepped to the front of the room. "There is a slight correction," Jensen announced coldly. "Phoenix Holdings is not doing this as a partner. We are doing it as an owner." The entire room erupted in sheer chaos. "Owner?" Richard shouted in horror. "At 9:01 this morning, the massive loan from Liberty Bank went into severe default." Jensen explained loudly. "Phoenix Holdings purchased that massive debt. You pledged the company, the building, and your personal estate. Phoenix Holdings is exercising its right to take complete control. Richard Sterling is officially no longer the CEO." Richard grabbed the table, looking nauseous. "You can't vividly do this. Where is the chairman? I demand to forcefully see him." Jensen looked directly at the back of the room. "The chairman is here, Mr. Bennett. The floor is yours." Richard wildly followed Jensen's gaze. He looked past Damon. He looked directly at me. He gasped, "Caleb?" "No, you are the janitor." I actively walked toward the head of the massive table. The wealthy crowd parted for me, exactly like the Red Sea. I stood powerfully in front of Richard Sterling. "You are sitting in my chair," I said, my voice deep and thunderous. Richard collapsed to his knees, utterly defeated, stripped of his entire empire, his wealth, and his pathetic pride. Remember this, folks. True power isn't loudly screaming from a penthouse. It is silently owning the entire building. Always protect your family, and never judge a book by its cover.